Okay, so we installed 2019 server, set it up with Active Directory domain services role. And then we did a sysprep. We got all the way down. We finished step 7 right here. And it does say, be very careful, don't run your VM after you've done sysprep. And also, don't from your host system. It's one of the few semesters I've not had to redo some computers because I sysprep the host machine. So congratulations, good. So sysprep ripped that thing called a global unique identifier out of the registry. And now that file can be cloned, just like Dell and HP. They set up a Windows 10 image with all of their specialized drivers and bloatware stuff, and they take an image of it, and then they copy it to millions of hard drives and slap them into the computers coming off the assembly line. And when you get it at your home and start it up, it initializes, creates that unique identifier, asks you for what your password's going to be and what's the computer name and all of that. That's basically what we did with running sysprep, checking that generalize and shut down. So now at the point of, well, we could clone the thing.
So are we supposed to
On what?
The system preparation tool where we can generalize and shut down?
So all of that should have been done already on Wednesday. You're not trying to sysprep your host machine, are you? I think it looks like you're trying to sysprep your host machine. You should cancel that and close that out. Yeah. You're about to break the string and tear your computer up. So after we done sysprep, we deleted the virtual machines and left the virtual hard disk file. And we can make copies of it if we wanted to. We're going to do something that's kind of odd and, well, you definitely want to do in production environment. You can only do this for lab environment. Say you want to experiment with a certain install 3, 4, 5 different times, and maybe in your experiments, you're thinking, I might tear it up so bad, I just want to delete it and start over. So you can link off of the parent install, kind of like what we did. We can link another hard disk to it, and all the changes will be recorded in a separate file. But what we installed will always be there. It won't ever change. So that's kind of neat. It's called a linked clone in VirtualBox. It's real easy. Just right click and say, create a linked clone, and it auto does it for you. Microsoft does it, and they don't even use the word clone. They use the word differencing disk. So they had to look what other people are doing and throw in their own vocabulary and descriptions to where you couldn't really easily figure it out without getting extra help on it. So that's where we're at now. Is we're going to be creating some clones, and these will create 2 new servers, be smaller than slightly running 2 separate ones that we just installed from scratch, just to kind of show you how for a lab environment you can do that. Step 8 is for VirtualBox, and well, we're not really, well, some of it's VirtualBox. If you're running Hyper-V, you delete the virtual machine, so we did that part. So we're down here at step 9. Again, there's some VirtualBox stuff here, but step 9, create 2 new virtual hard disks. This is where we are. We'll start up Hyper-V Manager. And you should not see your PM virtual machine in the list. Some of you may have an AM virtual machine. Some of you may have an AA virtual machine up there, but no PM virtual machine running anymore. However, your file's on your hard disk. So we're going to use that today. We're going to go to new hard disk. The wizard will pop up. Might turn that machine off. Just go next. Got a couple of options. For some reason, VHDX is highlighted. That's used for generation 2 virtual machines. Cool. I just don't know why that when you create new virtual machine, generation 2 is not by default highlighted, but creating a new hard disk it is. So I just found that entertaining. We're going to keep that, but just remember the legacy supports 2 terabytes max, and mostly for the generation 1 machines. So we'll keep the VHDX selected and go next. We get another selection of 3 right here. Go ahead and read through those. I don't know if they're that. Microsoft's description, is that explanatory or not? What is fixed size for? And fixed size does kind of make sense a little bit. Just that word. So if you create a fixed size hard disk, it'll create a file of that exact size, zeroed out on your computer. Normally takes some time because it's got to write that whole entire 60 gig, 100 gig, whatever it is, and zero it out. It says it's the fastest because nothing has to be grown or allocated. Dynamically expanding is the default. What is it? Dynamically expanding. Does that make sense? Stretches, grows. When you create a dynamically expanding, it creates a disk size like from 4K to 4 meg or something like that. Even though no matter what size you set it at, 60, 100 gig, it's still the same little bitty file that's created. And it grows as files and stuff are added inside it. So remember, we created 60 gigs. I don't know if you remember the size that it looked at when we looked at it when we left on Wednesday. They were about 10 gig in size. They weren't 60. So they grow as you add stuff. Kind of cool, a lot more efficient than just wasting 60 gig when, why would you want to waste that space? And when it's only going to use 10 or so. Then we have differencing. So it's a parent-child relationship with another disk you want to leave intact always. So you can make changes to the child disk, or any changes that that you're going to make are only written to the child disk. The parent disk never changes. And all children have to have the same parent, or the same, not the same parent, they all have to have the same format as the parent. So if your parent disk was VHD, we would have had to select VHD in the previous screen, but we picked generation 2, those create VHDX files. And that's what we want to do. We want to do differencing disk. So when we go next, we'll name it just like we created our read-only one before, only we're going to name it the name of our first server. We'll be real creative and simply call it server 1. So I'm going to type in PM because we're the afternoon class. We're local area networking, putting an I there for 1. Remember putting your last name? Do you remember your last name?
I think it starts with a letter.
I know. So Jacoby, you write Jacoby there. I'm going to put my last name, but this is the part you don't copy. Put your last name. Don't need any more kids.
No, it's like 4.
2 more.
Server 1. So PM for afternoon class, what class we're in, local area networking 1 here, your last name and server 1. Okay, when we go next, specify the virtual hard disk you want to use as the parent. So we have to browse for the parent disk. And that's that RO that you created. You should have a PM RO disk. And I think everybody was here.
So after creating the name, you're doing copy contents of the specific virtual hard disk?
No?
No?
Did you select differencing disk on the previous screen?
Then you can go back.
Yeah, go back to, click your back previous button.
This type,
Yeah, differencing disk. Now you go next.
that's again.
Yep. Then you can browse. And click your RO, one that you created. Yes. Okay, so I'm going to go to open. You just next and finish basically at this point. Make sure it says differencing when it goes to the type. It's a VHDX differencing disk. We'll click finish. Somebody asked, where's the virtual machine? Like, we didn't create a virtual machine. We created a hard disk
Where's the hard disk?
in that VM folder.
Oh, yeah.
Let's create a second one because it did say, if we go read these instructions here. So notice it says, yeah, leave the VHD selected, select differencing disk, and give it the appropriate name. Then choose your RO disk. After selecting finish, create one for server 2. So do steps again. We'll go back to hard disk. Next, differencing. Should probably have just copied the name. That's definitely not a name. I'm going to copy that because I'm going to need that a couple more times. We'll make it easier later on. So this is going to be server 2 this time in the name specification. The disk is still going to be the exact same parent disk or RO. Don't try to link it to server 1.
So PM LAN RO.
Yep. So again, I'm double checking. It's a VHDX differencing disk. This one's server 2 this time, still linking to the PM RO file we created on Wednesday. So our end goal is to attach those to 2 new virtual machines. And when we start them up, any changes like that initial global unique identifier will be written to those 2 disks that we just created. You wanted to see them while they're on your VM folder. You notice they are 4 meg in size, quite small. So as we boot up, those will grow as it finds any sectors that are different from the parent. So anything that's different from the RO will be written to these 2 files. Can save some space. You'll notice they'll probably come up to a few gig in size, but yep. Looking at our instructions, we now have to create 2 new virtual machines and attach the hard disk that we just created in step 9. We named them the same as the hard disk up here in this step. use the same RAM and settings we used on Wednesday. How much RAM did we use? Remember?
60, 40, 90.
4096. Cool. Using Hyper-V Manager, we'll go ahead and walk through this. So new virtual machine. I'm going to paste that name in there. I'm going to do server 1 first. So PM Lan 1, last name, server 1. So I said you probably need to copy that. Paste the name. We'll again use it again for server 2. So the generation we did on Wednesday was generation 2. So again, we picked generation 2. We use 4096 with dynamic memory being checked.
So we chose generation 2.
Yes. Do you remember networking? What did we have networking at? Internal. So go to the networking, just select internal. It tells us to use an existing hard disk in the instructions. So how do I do that? But my browse is grayed out. One of my browsers is grayed out.
You have to use circle.
So the radio button, those are radio buttons, the circle dot. Radio buttons, radio buttons. Because you can only pick one at a time, just like the car radio. You can't click 2 stations at once. That's why they're called radio buttons, because they thought of the memory buttons on your radio at the car. Whoever coined the term thought of that. I marked them radio buttons. Okay, we'll click browse and server 1. Well, you pick the server 1 tiny 4 meg disk that you created earlier, not the RO. This is the one that actually server 1 goes with server 1. Your summary look like that, except has your name on it.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Finish. We're doing the same thing, but we're doing it for server 2.
We're not changing that 1.7 gigabyte, right?
No, because it goes away.
Oh, yeah. It's not a big one.
So I'm just naming it server 2, generation 2, same RAM stuff with the dynamic memory checked, 4096. The internal. And use an existing virtual disk, of course, but this time pick server 2's disk. We're creating 2 virtual machines to follow the minimum best practice of setting up domain controllers. An Active Directory network that contains the entire core of a enterprise network. And best practice is to at least have it running on 2 different systems, 2 different physical systems. Why?
Something happens to one, so that's it.
A rat crawls in and starts chewing on the board and explodes and the server goes down.
Does it explode or does it not?
Everything explodes. It's cool that, you would have a second one that is still running. That way you could replace the one that blew up and then link it back to the one that's still running there, and everything will sync back So always have a minimum of 2 domain controllers running. That's why we're throwing out these 2. If you were wondering, you may not, just like, I'm just following along. That's the reason. Cool. I have 2 machines. I'm going to highlight both of them. I can start it up and I can also connect to them.
We're connecting the both at the same time.
Yep.
Oh,
Uh-oh. I missed a step. It's okay.
What step do we miss?
Modifying the hardware before I started it.
So is that good or bad?
It's okay. You can normally fix mistakes. Normally. However, changing the server name after you become a domain controller, that's one mistake you don't want to try to do and fix. We can go ahead and run through this hi there. Accept the license agreement. What's the passwords? Cool. Pass 1, 2, 3, 4. Capital P. Cloning 2 systems with a sysprep was a lot faster than installing from scratch. Installation was pretty quick, but this was even faster. So there's both of them up and running. It doesn't, just click whatever the continue button is.
What do we work with first?
Both of them. You remember the little Control Alt Delete icon? I don't need this little admin center. We don't have internet to fully implement that. So I'm gonna hit a little checkbox to not show that again. Looks like most everybody's got both servers up and running. Let's do the first step. Let's actually name these servers. So first thing, do you see in your title bar, it says PM LAN 1, your last name, server 2, and server 1. We're going to set the server names, the computer name up as server 1 and server 2. I've had students go to the server 1 VM and name it server 2 and go to the server 2 and name it server 1. And they were confused all semester long on which one that they were. It's like, it doesn't really matter if you just, but when they glanced at it, they would think, oh, I'm on server 1, so I'll start using 1 and typing different, and it's not working. And so try to name server 1 to match your virtual machine name. It has nothing to do with the operation of it. It's just to do with your psychology and be able to figure out, remember which one you're actually on and working on. What did we go to start configuring the server on Wednesday? No, we went somewhere. We went local server. And what did we find under local server? We only changed, I think, one thing. That was time zone. I talked about this section right here, local servers, all the stuff that used to be asked during installation. And now they just fill in some decent default values and wait till the end. So much better. Clicking local server, Central Time. Is that there? Our clone, not Central America. Central America would not follow daylight savings time and give you wrong time large half the year. But Central US and Canada will follow the daylight savings time, but not Central America.
I have it to Central America.
Well, you should change it. Because that's definitely, even though it's -6, it still runs on different daylight savings time stuff.
We're changing the computer name, right?
Yes, we're going to change the computer name. I'm going to start with server 1. And I'm going to look at my title bar to make sure I'm actually clicked on server 1. I'm not just going crazy. So I'll look up here. I'm on server 1. I'm going to change it first. So click the computer name. What's the first thing you see to change? Where's your cursor at? The description. Does that have anything to do with computer name? No. And I always see people change that, and they don't change the win dash, whatever the heck that is. And now they have to type that continuously throughout the whole semester instead of server 1. And that's really hard. I don't want to memorize that. I could, but I don't want to. Server 1, server 2, so much easier to memorize. So I'm going to make sure I hit change and make sure it has computer name field that I'm changing. No spaces are allowed. And no underscores. They can have a dash, but not an underscore. But only server 1 like that. Make sure you're not changing the description. I'm not going to restart. I'm just going to tell it to shut down so I can fix my snafu. I'm going to restart later, but I'm going to right click and shut down. It doesn't matter. It should continue to shut down. I'm going to fix my server 2's name.
Restart now or restart later?
Restart later and then right click and shut down. Do the exact same thing for server 2.
So right click, shut down.
Yep.
So server 2 spelled server 2.
Server 2 spelled server 2. Yep. So while y'all are fixing those, what I forgot to do is modify some of the hardware. By default, it only assigns 1 CPU to the virtual machine. And it also, the dynamic memory allows to use more than 4 gig. And I don't want some type of rogue screw up or something inside the virtual machine, try to take up all of my RAM plus bleed over into the virtual memory and fill my hard disk up. So the 2 settings need to change inside of that. It also says that in instructions, bump the processor count to 2 and set the minimum and maximum RAM sizes. So that's right there. Edit the settings. Processor count to 2, max RAM at 4096, minimum 384. The minimum doesn't really matter. It was more of an experiment in previous semesters. It never uses less than 512 meg. Well, I think I may have seen one core run at 511, 508 before. So each one of these, I'm going to go to File and Settings, or I could right click and go to Settings. Processor count to 2. And the memory, I think that's, I don't want to divide that out, but that's probably like a terabyte. That'd fill my 64 gig up, and it also fill my terabyte hard drive up if I try to use virtual memory. Some type of rogue process decided it needed a terabyte of RAM for this virtual machine. Like, no, this is research development type stuff. I might do something weird, and I'm going to put a hard limit here. Whoops.
What's the reserve machine percentage?
Don't change any of those. There's just an up arrow for number processor.
Virtual processor 2.
Yep.
All right.
What's the minimum RAM?
3 and 4.
384.
That one's not really critical. The max is the critical one.
This is for both of them, right?
Yep. So I'm going to go to server 2 and do the exact same thing. Hit processors, go up to 2. Memory, 4096 max and 384 minimum. Once you got those both done, you can go and restart them. Click start and bring them back up. Active Directory is a database. It takes advantage of having more than one processor. So it just helps labs run faster. Probably run faster than what you can think. But man, they'll start up fast, don't they? Old machines, it'll take minutes. Check out what else we need to do. So in the instructions, is everything spelled right in the instructions? Of course it's not. It will be in a second. Okay, I fixed the spelling error. There's an extra C. Let's double check what we've done. Have I missed anything? We created 2 virtual machines. We started them up. We set the processor and the RAM. We set pass 1, 2, 3, 4. We've named server 1 and server 2. The time zone is set already. And we need to activate our Windows version. When we installed on Wednesday, do you remember it gave us 2 different versions of server we could install? Which one of them was command prompt only, and the other was with the desktop. And then it had another 2 options. So it gave us 2 and 2, but you remember what the 2 different ones were? Standard, and you remember what the other one was? Data center.
Data center.
Older. Yeah, great. Older Microsoft Server used to have different components that would actually be included in the different editions, standard versus data center. The later versions, like 2016, I think 2012, can't remember on 2012 anymore. I know 2016, 2019 for sure. The 2 different versions, they come with all the same stuff. So what's the difference? Why does one cost 3 times more than the other one if they all have the same stuff on them and they all run on the same hardware? Okay. It's a licensing, it's a Hyper-V licensing difference. Standard lets you run 2 servers of the same version or older, free. Data center lets you run an unlimited number of the same version OS or older. So that's why it's 3 times more, because you have an unlimited number of VMs that just restrained upon what type of RAM and processors you have in your system. Why do you need lots of virtual machines? Every application needs to be on its own server. I'm not talking about Microsoft Word, Excel. I'm not talking about applications like that. I'm talking about like web servers and application. DNS server is an application. DHCP server is an application. File and print services, that's an application. Active Directory, that's an application. So each one of those should be on a separate system. If somebody found an exploit for DNS and you had everything on one computer, they could break into that one computer and destroy all of your services. So for security, for more than 20 years now, people's been splitting them up. It's too expensive to buy physical servers for that and not enough room. So that's why we have virtualization. And a benefit of data center. And guess what? Our host operating system that you log into is data center. It's the big $3,000 Windows 2019 server instead of the $600 one. Something like that on pricing. You can go look up pricing if you want. But the virtual machines are still over here. It's not activated. I have to activate it. And I need a license key. But if I get unlimited activations, what key do I put in there? That's where I said Google automatic VM activation keys. Automatic virtual machine activation key. When you Google it, it spells it out for you. So just acronym AVMA. So your AVMA keys. Published document on Microsoft website. As you scroll down, it kind of gives you a little matrix. The version of server that's installed as the host and what you log into before it launches the Hyper-V manager. What can it activate for free? Well, 2022 server can activate any version of Windows that's out there because that's the latest one. We are 2019, so we can only play with 2019 and older. So it just goes down as you go to older OSs, you have less that you can play with. We scroll down, tells you there's some command line ways to do it, or just paste it in. We got to watch out. The first grouping up here is for 2022 server. So we don't need any of those keys. We're not playing with 2022 server. We are playing with 2019s right here. The following keys activate 2019 server, and they've got 3 different editions. They got Essential, Standard, and Data Center. We selected the top option. You remember it was Standard. So we're looking for the TNK key right here to copy. And since we're running data center, we can set up an unlimited number of standard, essential, or data center onto this machine and use that key. Okay, I'm going to activate, and Control V should work. You can also use clipboard and type clipboard text in the menu at the top. Paste it in, should activate. Windows is activated. Do that to both servers. Cool. Windows is activated.
Still says not, because we have to refresh. Wait.
Yes, after you click the refresh button, it says activated. Neat. Are you ready to be paid a lot of money an hour for doing stuff like this?
Yeah.
That would be cash money.
Been going like a year and a half.
Because I mean, who studies and knows how? I mean, it looks easy, doesn't it? It is easy. Nobody knows how to do it, so it's taking money from a baby. Except they don't have money; they have candy sometimes. But then it's slobbered all over. So would you really want to take it? I don't know.
Maybe it was like.
What if we just make it?
Did you hear that? Yeah.
We need to set up IP addresses. Couple ways. I mean, Cisco, you went down there about o'clock, right clicked, open network sharing center and blah, blah, blah. But they got a link here that's a little bit faster, takes you right to the network adapter. You see the Ethernet link. So it's right there, Ethernet, and the link right beside it. We're going to set up our TCP IP. Does everybody have Cisco one?
Well, I'm in it right now.
Okay.
Where'd you go?
Properties of the Ethernet adapter. And then I'll double click the TCP IP, well, right here, TCP IP version 4. You can double click it. Just make sure you're not hitting the checkbox, because if you click in the checkbox, it turns it off, and you don't want to do that. Always highlight it and hit properties. So yeah, TCP IP version 4 properties. You should have a dialog box like this. And a lot more people that hadn't had Cisco in the first class. This is a little bit slower. And if you're just in Cisco and not played with IP addressing, this might be a little bit slow for right now. So we're going to set static addresses. Preferably you set static addresses on servers, routers, switches, things like that, that you're going to manage, need to get to. I'm going to use 192. We have to turn your numlock key on. It's really annoying. 192.168. And .1's already been used for another independent study class. We chose .5 for our morning class.
.4.
And I know .2 might be used on some machines if we forgot to clear a VM.
.69.
No.
.99.
So let's use 6. .1 on server 1 or 2 on server 2.
That's big brain here.
If you click in the subnet mask field, it'll autofill it out for you. Well, that's pretty nice.
Do we need to add a DNS?
No, we have no internet. We're internal. The DNS server is not really, at this point, it's important. It will throw an error. It will be on server 2, but not on this one at this time. So I'm just going to leave it blank on server 1. Server 2, I'm actually going to use server 1's IP address there. So over here on server 2, the properties, all the same thing, just about, 192.168.6.2 this time. And the DNS, I'll put a 192.168.6.1 because that will be important later. It'll be important next week when we get to managing server 2 in an Active Directory domain.
So the DNS for server 2 is server 1.
Yes, because server 1 will be a DNS server. They're actually both going to become DNS servers. You know, there's 2 slots. They always want backups. They also told you they want backups for Active Directory domain controllers, and Active Directory needs to run DNS too. Install those servers. At the very end of Wednesday or Friday's class, we'll have 192.168.1 in the first slot and 192.168.6.2 in the second slot. I probably misspoke. I probably left the 6 out of my first rambling, but
Probably.
both of them will be the same. 1 will be the primary, 2 will be the secondary on both of them. And all the clients and anybody that would be participate in the network would have to have those same addresses in the DNS section. Otherwise, it doesn't work. DNS, yeah, it's the 411. If you know what 411 is. Like, no.
I know, I've heard of it.
I don't.
It's before the internet and Google and everybody had smartphones and like, I want to know what the phone number to Pizza Hut is, or what's the address to Pizza Hut, or the 411, it's like an answering service. And I need the address to Pizza Hut in North Little Rock. Oh, it's and they would Google it because nobody had.
It's kind of like the same thing as Cha-Cha, right? All 242, 242.
So I don't know.
What's the number for that one?
Okay, I'm going to refresh both of these. So does everything look sane on your screen? I mean, if you're looking at your title bar, do you see? You know, do you see server 2 matching server 2 matching the IP address down here of .2? Does that look sane? And in server 1, does it show server 1? And so glance at those. It's break time. When I come back from break, I'm going to grade your lab while it's up on your screen. Well, let's take a break and I'll show you how to arrange these so I can quickly grade.
Do we need to validate settings upon exit?
And sure, it doesn't matter. Okay, so we come back from break and went and graded everybody's lab 1 install. Except it's Douglas, right? It's not here. Yeah, that'll be on YouTube. The world will know. So we've discussed that you need at least 2 servers to have Active Directory domain. That's best practice. At least always have 2 or more servers running your Active Directory domain services. Because just think, if Walmart had 1 domain controller and it died, and that to replace it and create all like 3.2 million employees' accounts again, that would suck. So, more domain controllers, the better. That's why we set up these 2 servers. These are both going to be domain controllers and set up a network. On server 1, we're going to mess with it for the rest of the day. Server 2, we are not going to deal with. So we can just hide it. Hit the little X and close server 2 out, leave it running. It's one cool thing about Hyper-V versus like VirtualBox. You can close it out and it still runs in the background. So we're always going to keep our servers running. We're always going to keep these computers running too. Don't ever shut these down. It's not just the PC you're on. There's also all these other things running. So yes, we're running them 24/7. Well, you can remote in on your vacation day on Monday and play around with your machines if you wanted. I know this is like your career stuff. You'd be surprised. Some people are more curious. Of course, you can also replicate the stuff we did here if you have a home computer that has capability. Any extra practice on stuff definitely help out.
Wait, so on the server, does it matter that remote desktop is disabled? Do the server wanted to?
I believe that we can change that later on, but for now, no, not really. Remote management's enabled. These do have a graphical interface. So, remote desktop's normally a good thing to have turned on. Sometimes there's a lot of security issues too, could arise with a remote desktop. So Active Directory domain services is basically a database that starts up, houses user accounts, password, computer accounts. If you watch that first video 1.1.1 on there, it showed that entities can authenticate into Active Directory. It's not just a person, the machines with the global unique identifier, things like that. So when you boot up a workstation or a server and it's on a domain, it actually logs into the domain even before the control alt delete screen shows up or the user prompt. So where am I headed with that? Domain controllers run the authentication service for the domain. And for that to function properly, they must disable the local users and groups on their local authentication. Have you ever checked under computer management and seen local users and groups? That lets me know that this is not a domain controller because there's local users and groups there. Once we become a domain controller, that disappears. And only something called Active Directory is accessed through Server Manager. And some of the feature tools will be there. Cool. Before we start promoting this up to a domain controller, let's also talk about some of the terminology with Active Directory. They have a term called forest. You will likely see that in chapter 7. Maybe some talked about in chapter 2 or 3. But a forest is talked about. What's a forest? It's got trees. So forest has trees in it. And Microsoft has something called a tree. Most forests probably only have one tree in them, especially what that you would jump into. Some Active Directory forests have multiple trees, and that has to do with what they call a namespace. And why would you need more than one tree in your forest? Other than that just makes sense. But that's where you get huge conglomerates like Disney. Because Disney owns ABC. Did you know that? They also own Pixar. What about DreamWorks? Do they own DreamWorks yet? So they own Pixar, they own DreamWorks. They own Lucas, Star Wars. They own Marvel. So if you go to Pixar.com, Pixar.com is what they're considering a namespace, but they're owned by Disney. And for them to share resources, they would set up an Active Directory forest and they would create different trees, one for Pixar, one for Disney, one for DreamWorks, and so forth. And that's how they separate out the administrative units. Now, within each of those trees, there'll be a domain, the domain being Disney, the domain being Pixar, things like that. And each one of those will have probably administrators working for them. But the IT people at Disney that started the forest, he actually has access to hit all of them, and he can control how much can be shared between the different domains and stuff. So there's a domain admin, and then there's an enterprise admin that controls all of the domains across all the trees in a network. However, you also come to some things like the National Guard. Well, they're in every state, right? I know back 15, 20 years ago, they set up Active Directory. They decided to use a single domain for the whole country. A bunch of companies will do that. They'll use one forest. They won't split them up. It's like one forest and just one domain will run everything. It's kind of cool to run that route. Inside of that, they've got organizational units. They kind of look like folders graphically, how they're graphically displayed to you. And they had each state as a folder name. And then inside each state, they had all the counties that would have a National Guard unit in it. And then the people inside of that. So it's kind of hierarchical designs like that. And the National Guard's not going to buy out the army or anything. So a bunch of companies that, aren't huge conglomerates like Disney and Alphabet, which Google is part of Alphabet. I think, what does Alphabet own? It owns Facebook and Google and Instagram, and it's scary. Yeah, YouTube. So we're going to focus in this class on small, medium businesses, even one that could grow big, but just the single domain. So we're going to create one forest and one tree. Yes, we'll have one tree in our forest. Basically, if you create your first domain, it sets up a database table for forest and one for tree. And that's all we're going to deal with. If you get to work for one of the big companies, well, same kind of concept, just hopefully they're not going to put you at the #1 top engineer right off the bat. You'll go through years of training and learning before you move all the way up to, hey, you've got administrative access to everything, to the world. So the domain that we're going to create is going to be Contoso. It's a fictitious company, Contoso.com. You think, who the heck's Contoso.com? Surely somebody in the world's got Contoso.com, maybe. It directs you to Microsoft.com. Contoso.com is a fake company that Microsoft created for training purposes decades ago. And they put it in all of their training manuals and curriculum. And because it's in their documentation and in training, they decided they should probably register that just in case, a not very savory site or group of people, hackers or something, stole that domain and people going through classes just randomly, they typed it into the address bar. And for some reason, they were connected to the internet instead of an internal network like we're doing. And you hit the internet. They didn't want an accident to happen. So they went ahead and paid and registered Contoso.com. But it doesn't exist. It's a Microsoft made up. There's some IP addresses. If you're in Cisco, I don't know if you actually study them, but there's the 198, I think, range or something like that. That's specifically for documentation. So if you're reading and learning networking and you're looking at these addresses and you try to apply it to your computer, it won't take the addresses, it won't route or anything, because specifically for training purposes, and they didn't want an untrained person accidentally using them try to use it on a real network. So you'll find that most vendors have some type of documentation company or something that they've created, hard-coded in not to run or work. Or in Microsoft's case, registered to redirect back to them. Neat. I see a triangle up here. Attention. It's yellow against the gray, bland background. It tells us that we've deployed out Active Directory domain services role. It doesn't actually say role, but yes, we did. It's not configured yet. It's not fully deployed, but it's sitting there waiting to be configured and deployed and running. And it gives us a nice little link to click. It's better in the olden days. You had to remember a command to launch. Now we just click a link and that command is gone. They removed it from the system. So make sure on server 1, the target server up here should say server 1. And I looked at all of your screens. It looked like you all spelled server 1 correct. Let's check out. We have 3 radio buttons. There's one of them that's by default selected. Add a domain controller to an existing domain. It's probably the most common thing you'd run into in your IT field. Standing up a new server, a new version, or an extra server for backup purposes to help speed up the network, or just be an extra server in case another one goes down. It's the most common thing to do. However, we don't have an existing domain yet. If you go work for some consulting firms and you go set up networks for new companies, then it's kind of what we're going to do today. Let's look down a little bit further. Add a new domain to an existing forest. That's where you could create a new tree, or you could create a new domain underneath, like maybe support.microsoft.com. Support would be its own domain. Sales.microsoft.com be a separate domain. If you have entities kind of like that and you want to split it up like that in your company. Or a different tree where you'd have Pixar.com and DreamWorks could be split up like that, where you want a different namespace. So that's the second option. Then the bottom one down here, add a new forest. It's at the very bottom because it's rare you'd ever do that. That would be if you go work for a brand new company that doesn't have anything, or you go work for a consulting firm that, you know, sets up brand new companies. Or you're a student and you're just practicing and learning stuff at home, and maybe you go work for a company and then you go home, get a virtual machines and try to replicate what's at your work so that you can write and screw around with scripts before you try to hit play at work and destroy everything. See, does it destroy my stuff? That's very common. We're going to add a new forest.
Oh boy.
Because nothing is created yet. We've got to start somewhere. So adding a forest creates the first tree and the first domain. So forest tree domain is all created, and that's typical all that you do for medium, small companies and stuff, even some of the bigger companies that doesn't need multiple namespaces and multiple domains. So we're going to do contoso.com. CONTOSO.
COSO.
Yep. Contoso. This is easy to get wrong, and well, you'd have to disband your entire forest and start over. It'd probably actually just be easy to delete that server 1 and restart it and do it all over again if you misspelled this.
Just double check. It's
Yeah.
CONTOSO.com.
Correct. Good spelling. Everybody got eyes on yours? Your brain will do stuff like correct your typos and you won't even see it's misspelled. That sucks. My brain does that. It's like I can't see my own mistakes unless I don't look at it for like 2 weeks and then go back and reread something. Go, good Lord, what did I write? Moving next. This is where I told you about the local users and groups disappear, and only the domain services and the Active Directory user accounts and stuff are available on a domain controller. So we're going to create a directory service restore mode password. If you ever need to boot up into safe mode, or know that recovery option off that the installation media, you're going to need a password to get into C drive. But you don't have any local users and groups anymore. However, when you boot into safe mode or the recovery mode, it will be able to access an administrator account via the password you type right here. In our case, pass1234. This is critical that you would document it probably on a piece of paper somewhere and put it in a fireproof cabinet. So we're using pass1234. But 4 years from now, when the server just blows up and you need to get into safe mode to try to recover it, you may not be working there anymore. You got a better job somewhere else. Or you've completely forgotten what the password was going to be because y'all been changing passwords every 6 months. And now you're on like the 9th password and you have no clue what you set 4 years ago. Two extremely likely scenarios. So this would need to be documented if you need to go into recovery. And if you need to go into that, the network's down, you need to fix it quick. And everybody's looking at you and you're like, oh crap. So it's really important for that. Let's move on. We have no other DNS. Nothing's above us. We're internal lab, so we're just going to go next. It's going to scan for an appropriate NetBIOS name, put up there. Normally it's just like Contoso, the first part of the domain. Except here on campus, we have an asub.edu and we have an asub.college. And the asub.college has a NetBIOS name of Vanguard. The reason for that is ASUB is the first part of both of the two domains that's on this network. And one's a .edu and one's .college. So both of them will try to use ASUB. But it says, no, there's already an ASUB, type something different. So they had to go with Vanguard. It doesn't match the domain name. Just the way it worked. The location where everything's going to be stored. For our case, we're just going to keep the defaults. If you are needing to do this for a company that's going to have lots and lots of employees, you know, Walmart's over 1 million employees, then you'd probably need to start paying attention to just how much space is that going to take. You might have to move this to some dedicated hard drives or something. So we're just going to go next at this point, though. We can review. I really like this about the modern OSs Microsoft has out. It shows you what it's going to do, the commands that are going to be executed. Remember, the graphics are just pretty stuff to look at. They're not actually what's going on in the backgrounds. Here's what's going to be run in the background. So all the little stuff this dialog box is going to do, it's going to run this stuff. The dialog boxes too sometimes only give the most common options. Sometimes you may want to do some custom things. So you could research the install-adds forest module and see if there's some extra things you might want to add into this that the dialog box doesn't allow you to configure. Or if you're a consultant, you're needing to set up 50 different domains really quick. You could copy this and script it and change a couple of names like Contoso and stuff in here and run it on a bunch of different servers. I'm going to close it out. We're going to let the dialog box finish itself and execute all that code in the background. Just next, run a few prerequisites. Is your system in a sane state to actually become a domain controller or not? That's what it's checking now. Couple little warnings, but nothing red. That means we're good to go. One of them says, hey, if you got really old computers, they're not going to communicate with us. That's good. We don't want old stuff connecting.
So click install now.
So click install. It'll automatically restart the system. So I remember 2000 server, this would take a good 20, 30 minutes to go through this process, maybe up to 40 minutes. And then it would restart. And the initial startup would take another 30 to 50 minutes for it to boot up.
About to be signed out.
So we would study all the steps that we would need to do for that way back in the day. And we'd try to get it executed in the first 10 minutes of class so that maybe by the end of class, it booted up as a domain controller. We've already way exceeded the speed of a 2000 system because it's done already. It is now in the second part of actually starting up and launching the database system. This is the longest startup that the server will probably run into.
So we ask questions while we wait.
Maybe. This will take 5 to 8 minutes, something like that, for it to start up. When we start it up, we'll check computer management. We'll notice local users and groups are gone. We'll also notice we're not just logging in as administrator. It'll tell us that we're logging into Contoso.
Let's say we turned it into a domain.
Yes.
That makes sense.
So I guess while we're waiting, what should I have? Wait, this is something pretty old and meaningless now, but what did y'all think of Y2K?
So I'm going to resume recording. I cut out a couple of minutes of waiting. So that Control-Alt-Delete. You've either got other or it's come up to Contoso /administrator automatically for you. If it's asking for a username, you'd have to type administrator. I'm not sure why some of yours didn't just auto have that on the screen.
Mine did not,
If you type administrator, you'll notice it will be logging into Contoso. You could also, there's 2 methods to logging in. This is a legacy login that showed up pictured on my screen. Domain name, WAC administrator. The modern login is administrator@contoso.com, like an email address. So the Contoso WAC administrator is pre-Active Directory prior to 2000 coming out, 1999, October time from roughly. And the email address login is the modern, they both still work 23 years later. Yeah, 22 and a half years, roughly. I told you to look and see, do you have local users and groups anymore? Missing.
Whoa.
That pretty much lets you know you're a domain controller if you don't have local users and groups anymore. There's some other things like certain ports that are open. I'll let you know. So we're off on Monday. I went to tools and Active Directory users and computers. I now see that we have a domain, and I see my administrator account got placed into a domain, Active Directory database running. When we come back on Wednesday, we'll do some fixes, some annoying fixes. Remind me, we need to stop the password expiration. I don't want the password to expire in 42 days. 42 is the answer to everything. Remember, ASCII 42 is an asterisk, and an asterisk means search for any and everything. And the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, it's 42 is the answer to life, the universe, and everything. The question, the ultimate question. If you're that nerdy, some of you are that nerdy, maybe. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Computer has spent 1 million years or 6 million years, whatever, calculating the answer to the ultimate question. And they come up with 42.
I've heard about it. I remember hearing about it from my German teacher back in high school. It's not real big.
Yeah. So when they come up with, when's the password expiration date? Whoever was coding this in the Microsoft was a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy fan, and go, 42 is the answer to everything. Yeah. So we're going to do that on Wednesday when we come back. Fiddle with some of that stuff.